Tonight, in the Kingswell Hotel's Crystal Ballroom, they raised a toast to my husband, Grant, and called me a nobody as a polite joke. I simply smiled, sipped my wine, and watched the LED screen count down. My purse held a phone with a single execute button. When that timer reaches 0, they'll learn precisely who signs the paychecks they're so proud to receive. My name is Rowan Ellis. Tonight, I am a ghost in a gown, a phantom at the feast held in my husband's honor. The grand ballroom of the Kingswell Hotel in Halverton was a cathedral built to worship prophet, and tonight's service was in full swing. Chandeliers dripped light like frozen waterfalls onto a sea of black-tie sharks and their jewel-toned wives. The air, thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, hummed with the low thrum of self-congratulation. This was the annual CEO dinner for Helix Ridge Logistics, a company that moved boxes across the country with brutal efficiency, and at the center of this universe, radiating a gravitational pull of charm and ambition, was my husband, Grant Levitt. I walked beside him, my hand a delicate weight on the arm of his impeccably tailored Tom Ford suit. To the room, he was a titan, the wunderkind who had tripled the company's valuation in 5 years, the savior of a legacy brand teetering on the edge of obsolescence. His smile was a polished weapon, his handshakes firm promises of shared prosperity. Flashbulbs from the industry press popped like distant, harmless gunfire, and with every burst of light, I felt myself receding further into his shadow, my features blurring until I was just an accessory, perfectly matched to his cufflinks. At 34, I had mastered the art of being present and yet entirely invisible. We arrived at the head table, a long, imposing stretch of white linen reserved for the board of directors and their chosen partners. It was an altar of corporate power, laden with heavy silver, gleaming crystal, and candles that cast long, dancing shadows on faces hardened by years of ruthless negotiation. The conversation was a predictable symphony of buzzwords. Vision, one VP declared, swirling a glass of burgundy that cost more than a junior employee's weekly salary. It's about a paradigm shift in last-mile logistics. Exactly, another chimed in. We're not just moving freight, we're disrupting the entire supply chain. They spoke of synergy and restructuring, beautiful, sterile words that sanitize the reality of hostile takeovers and mass layoffs. To them, it was a grand strategic game. I, who had spent years modeling the cascading human cost of such restructuring, heard only the clinical language of demolition. I took my seat between Grant and the wife of a senior vice president, a woman named Beatrice, whose face was a testament to the miracles of modern dermatology and the anxieties of maintaining her husband's station. She surveyed me with an air of bored appraisal, her eyes lingering for a moment on my simple, unadorned silk dress. After a perfunctory nod, she turned to the wife of the COO across the table. "So, Rowan," she began, her voice carrying a saccharine edge that barely concealed its condescension. She made a show of leaning in, as if sharing an intimate secret. "What is it you do, exactly?" Before I could form a reply, she offered her own suggestion, a perfectly aimed dart. "Is it interior decor? I always say a supportive home environment is key to a man's success." A ripple of polite, brittle laughter traveled down the table. It wasn't a warm sound. It was the clatter of ice cubes in an empty glass, sharp and cold. Every eye turned to me, expectant. They weren't waiting for an answer. They were waiting for my reaction. A little piece of entertainment before the first course arrived. I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks, a blush of anger I had long ago learned to master. I looked to Grant, my husband, the man who had once promised we were a team. I saw the brief flicker of annoyance in his eyes, not at Beatrice, but at me, for being the subject of this awkward moment. He gave a smooth, dismissive laugh, a politician's tool for deflecting an inconvenient question. He placed his hand over mine on the table, a gesture that looked like affection, but felt like a command to stay silent. "Rowan," he said, his voice a balm of practiced charm, "is the magic behind the curtain He paused, letting the ambiguity hang in the air for a moment before delivering the killing blow. She is at home. She keeps my life in order so I can keep this one running. A silence followed, brief but profound. In that small gap between his words and the table's murmurs of approval, I heard everything he wasn't saying. He wasn't just saying I was a housewife. He was affirming their assumption. He was telling them I was irrelevant, a decorative piece of his life, a nobody. He was denying the decade of work, the quiet brilliance, the very architecture of the systems that allowed him to stand on this stage and call himself a savior. The warmth of his hand on mine suddenly felt glacial. A waiter appeared at my elbow, placing a heavy, leather-bound menu in front of me. I opened it. The scent of expensive paper and ink a strange comfort. The entree was a choice between pan-seared veal with a truffle reduction or Chilean sea bass on a bed of saffron risotto. Extravagant food, designed to impress. I made a silent toast to the irony of it all. A meal of expensive veal and cheap words. The most valuable thing at this table wasn't the food or the wine. It was the truth, and it wasn't on the menu. As I pretended to study the options, my gaze drifted across the table and met the eyes of Miriam Quaid, the company's chief financial officer. Miriam was a different breed from the rest of the board. She was sharp, pragmatic, and utterly devoid of the corporate bluster that Grant and his VPs so loved. She wasn't smiling. Her look was a complex mixture of pity and something else, caution. She knew the numbers. She knew the real state of the company's finances, and she knew the risks Grant was taking. Her eyes seemed to say, I see you, and I'm sorry. But there was a wariness there, too. The look of someone who understood that in this world. Knowledge was as much a liability as it was a power. I held her gaze for a fraction of a second longer than was comfortable, then gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, woman to woman. But it wasn't my only silent communication of the evening. My eyes scanned the room until I found him, the head of the hotel's event staff, a man I had spoken with at length 2 days prior. He was standing near the sound booth, his posture rigid with attention. He saw me looking. I gave him the smallest, most infinitesimal nod imaginable. He responded with an equally subtle dip of his head. Confirmation received. The private audio feed to the backstage microphone was secure. My microphone. The low murmur of conversation was suddenly interrupted by a gentle musical fanfare. The lights dimmed slightly, and a spotlight found the master of ceremonies at the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice boomed through the speakers. If I could have your attention. This was the prelude, the main event, Grant's speech. As the MC began his glowing introduction, listing Grant's manufactured achievements like verses from a holy text, I slipped my hand into my evening bag. My fingers bypassed my lipstick and the small key to a private safe deposit box, closing around the cool, metallic case of my phone. I brought it up just below the level of the table, shielding the screen with my hand. I unlocked it with my thumb. There was only one app on the home screen. I opened it. The interface was stark, black and white, designed for function, not beauty. A single line of text glowed in the dim light. Payroll node, armed. The system was live. The protocols were active. The key was in the ignition. The MC was reaching his crescendo. A leader of unparalleled vision, a true titan of industry, and a man I am proud to call a friend. Please join me in giving a warm Halverton welcome to the CEO of Helix Ridge Logistics, Mr. Grant Levitt. A wave of thunderous applause washed over the ballroom. Grant squeezed my hand, stood up, and buttoned his jacket, basking in the adoration. He was a king ascending to his throne. I slowly placed my wineglass back on the table, the crystal making a soft, definitive click against the linen. The air in the room felt suddenly charged, thin and electric. I wondered, as I watched my husband approach the stage with his award-winning smile, if anyone else could smell it. That sharp, clean scent of ozone that hangs in the atmosphere just before a storm breaks. As the applause for Grant crashed around me, a sound as hollow and manufactured as the applause track on a sitcom, my mind drifted back to a different room, A different kind of applause. It was a sterile conference hall 9 years ago, smelling of industrial-grade carpet cleaner and lukewarm coffee. The A-list event for supply chain innovation. Grant was the keynote speaker, a charismatic evangelist preaching the gospel of speed. He paced the stage, a lion in a well-cut suit, painting a vivid picture of a future dominated by instant gratification, of drones darkening the skies and automated trucks thundering down highways. "Speed is the new currency," he declared, and the room of starched collars had erupted. I was there to present a paper on predictive analytics and inventory management. My presentation was in a smaller breakout room, attended by data scientists and system architects. I didn't speak of speed. I spoke of data. I talked about the quiet, invisible network of information that underpinned everything. I argued that speed without intelligence was just a faster way to crash. While Grant was selling the sizzle of the engine, I was explaining the intricate, unsexy mathematics of the GPS that guided it. He was the vision. I was the code. After his speech, he found me by the coffee station. He said he'd heard about my session from one of his engineers. "You're the data girl," he'd said, with that smile that could disarm armies. "I'm the speed guy. Maybe we should merge." It was a corporate joke, a pickup line wrapped in industry jargon, and against my better judgment, I was charmed. That charm culminated a year later on a pier at Lake Spire Harbor, the city skyline glittering across the water like a scattered handful of diamonds. The air was cold, but Grant's hand was warm as he knelt on the weathered wood. He didn't talk about love in the way poets do. He spoke our language. He said we were the ultimate team, the perfect synergy of vision and execution. He spoke of building an empire together, a dynasty. "We're a team. Rowan," he promised, slipping a ring on my finger that felt as heavy as a contract. "Always." I believed him. I believed in the merger. I believed the promise that our combined assets would create something unstoppable. The merger, as it turned out, was more of a hostile takeover. In the beginning, I had a seat at the table. My insights into data-driven logistics were instrumental in the early acquisitions that solidified Helix Ridge's market position. But as the company grew, my presence in the boardroom became an inconvenience. I was too detail-oriented, too prone to asking questions that slowed down Grant's relentless pursuit of speed. The invitations to sensitive strategy meetings dwindled, replaced by gentle suggestions that I focus on renovating our new home. My name disappeared from internal memos and was replaced with glossy photos on the company's Our Team webpage. There I was, smiling serenely beside Grant at a charity gala, the perfect supportive CEO's wife. My official title became unspoken but clear. Chief Domestic Officer. The team he had promised had become a one-man show with a decorative partner. While I was being relegated to the role of beautiful silent wallpaper in Grant's life, I started building my own house in secret. It began in the small home office he'd condescendingly called my hobby room. While he was out charming investors, I was quietly coding. I saw a gap in the market he and his competitors ignored: the cumbersome, inefficient payroll systems used by most mid-sized logistics companies. They were obsessed with the flow of goods, but they ignored the flow of money to the people making it happen. So, I built Northline Systems, a lean, ruthlessly efficient company that provided a simple, secure API for managing payroll and benefits. It was a ghost in the machine, a B2B solution so seamless that its clients rarely thought about it, and they never thought to ask who owned it. I registered the company through a series of shell LLCs, the ownership trail leading to a blind trust. It was my data, my architecture, my secret. While Grant was building his empire of boxes and trucks, I was building an invisible empire of numbers. The prenuptial agreement arrived via his lawyer 5 months before our wedding. It was a thick, intimidating document, presented not as a matter of love, but of business. "It's just to protect the company's assets, Roe," Grant had explained, his tone smooth and reasonable, "to keep things clean for the shareholders." I remember the weight of the paper in my hands, each clause a carefully constructed wall between his world and mine. He saw it as him protecting his assets from me. He never imagined I might be protecting mine from him. I read every line, consulted my own lawyer, a discreet professional Grant didn't know existed, and added a few minor, seemingly innocuous clauses of my own. Then, I signed it with a smile. To him, my signature was an act of submission. To me, it was the first step in building my own exit strategy, my own emergency escape hatch, complete with a golden parachute he'd unknowingly paid for. Our evenings together devolved into a predictable routine. Dinner wasn't a conversation, it was a debriefing. Grant would recount his day, a monologue of corporate conquests and strategic brilliance, while I would push exquisitely prepared food around my plate. He'd list his victories, and I'd nod and murmur the appropriate praises. My own work, the challenges of launching Northline, the thrill of landing my first major client, all of it remained unsaid. He never asked. In his world, my days were a gentle blur of yoga classes and lunch dates. "Don't stress yourself with the details, sweetheart," he'd say, reaching across the table to pat my hand if I dared to bring up a news article about market volatility. "I've got it all under control." I learned to be silent. It was a new kind of programming language. I learned that in the syntax of our marriage. My opinions were compiler errors. My ambitions were deprecated functions. Every unspoken thought, every stifled argument, was a deliberate semicolon, placed precisely to ensure the program of our life together would continue to run without crashing. Silence became my code, my shield. His mother, Vivian Levitt, was the high priestess of this philosophy, a woman sculpted from iron and pearls. She saw her son's success as her own crowning achievement and my role as purely functional. At a family dinner, she once cornered me by the fireplace, her voice a conspiratorial whisper laced with steel. "You're a smart girl, Rowan," she'd said, adjusting the perfect silk scarf at her throat. "You understand that a good woman knows her place is behind her man. Supporting him, that's where the strength lies." I remember the look on her face. Smug, certain. The matriarch passing down ancient, sacred wisdom. I gave her the same serene smile I wore in the company photos. "Oh, I agree completely, Vivian," I replied, my voice light and pleasant. "In the control room. The operator's station is always at the back. It has the best view of all the moving parts." She'd stared at me for a moment, a flicker of confusion in her eyes before she dismissed it, patting my arm and gliding away. She'd heard the words, but she hadn't understood the meaning. It was after that conversation that I created a new file on my encrypted personal server. It was a simple text document. I named it Decor. Every slight, every condescending remark, every time I was dismissed or ignored. I logged it. Beatrice's snide question tonight about interior design would be the latest entry. The file wasn't about bitterness, it was about data, a meticulous record of the system's flaws, a log file of a marriage that was slowly, irrevocably failing. Each entry was a reminder of why the escape hatch needed to be built, and why the system itself needed a hard reboot. Watching Grant on stage now, bathed in the golden light of the adoring crowd, I felt a strange sense of calm. He looked invincible, a modern-day king addressing his court. But kings can be overthrown, empires can fall, and sometimes the person who holds the real power isn't the one on the throne, but the quiet, overlooked person in the control room watching the monitors. I knew this day would come. I knew there would be a moment when the data I had so carefully collected would become undeniable, when the silent code I had written would finally execute. I had always pictured it, this moment of reckoning, and in my mind, it always took place in a room just like this one, a room with chandeliers. Grant's voice filled the ballroom, a rich, confident baritone polished by countless board meetings and media interviews. He spoke of synergy and forward momentum, of our shared journey to excellence. The words were hollow, a collection of corporate platitudes designed to inspire loyalty and mask the rot beneath the floorboards. As he spoke, my mind was not on his performance, but on the silent, intricate architecture I had spent years building, a system of numbers with no names, controlled by a name nobody knew. It all began with Northline Systems, to the world, and to the few clients who used its API. It was a boutique fintech firm specializing in payroll solutions. It had no flashy office, no sales team, no public profile. It was designed to be invisible, a ghost in the financial plumbing of the logistics industry. Its true nature was hidden behind a labyrinth of legal constructs. Northline Systems was officially owned by a Delaware LLC, which in turn was owned by another. Each one a dead end, a layer of anonymizing corporate fabric. The final thread in this web led to a quiet, unassailable entity, the Riverwick Trust. The trust was my fortress, its charter written by the best lawyer money could buy, its assets shielded from any conceivable external threat, including a divorce. The beneficiary was anonymous. The trustee was bound by an ironclad NDA. The sole authorized signatory was me. Riverwick's primary asset, its crown jewel, was not glamorous. It was a controlling interest in a mid-sized, respectable payment processing company called Horizon Pay. Horizon Pay was solid, dependable, and utterly boring, the perfect camouflage. And 2 years ago, through a competitive and seemingly ordinary bidding process, Horizon Pay won the exclusive contract to manage the entire payroll for a rapidly expanding client, Helix Ridge Logistics. Grant had celebrated the deal, praising his team for securing a processor that offered a 2% reduction in administrative fees. He never bothered to look into Horizon Pay's ownership structure. Why would he? It was just a vendor, a line item in the budget. He had no idea he had just handed the keys to his kingdom to his wife. The contract his legal team signed was over 100 pages long, buried deep within the boilerplate, in a section titled Service Level Agreements and Contingencies, was Clause 11B. It was a standard-looking morals clause, the kind of thing lawyers put in to cover extreme cases of executive misconduct. But my version was different. I had drafted it myself, using language that was both precise and broad. It stipulated that in the event of a Grade A ethics violation by the client's CEO, a term carefully defined to include misappropriation of funds, fraudulent reporting, and gross professional misconduct, Horizon Pay reserved the right to activate a payroll safety mode. Safety mode was a clinical, benign-sounding term for a corporate nuke. It didn't stop payroll, it rerouted it. Upon activation, all outgoing funds, salaries, bonuses, executive compensation, would be diverted to a secure third-party escrow account. The funds would be held there, untouchable, until an emergency session of the client's board of directors could be convened to investigate and formally verify the company's ongoing operational integrity. It was a circuit breaker, designed to halt a runaway train. It gave me the power to freeze every dollar flowing out of Helix Ridge with a single keystroke. Getting such a potent clause into the contract required leverage. That leverage came during the pandemic. Like many companies, Helix Ridge faced a sudden credit crunch. Supply chains were snarled, clients were late on payments, and the company's cash flow was hemorrhaging. Grant was panicking. While he was putting on a brave face for the board, I was reading the internal financial reports he carelessly left on his home office desk. I saw the vulnerability. Through another anonymous entity, a special purpose vehicle, or SPV, managed by the Riverwick Trust, I extended a lifeline, a 7-figure line of credit, offered at a surprisingly favorable rate. The offer came through a boutique investment firm and seemed like a godsend. Grant jumped at it. He was so relieved, so eager to plug the financial hole, that his team barely glanced at the conditions. The price for this life-saving credit wasn't a high interest rate. It was a small, 3-page addendum to their existing service contract with their payroll provider, Horizon Pay. The addendum was framed as a necessary security measure to protect the lender's investment. It contained technical updates, data security protocols, and one other seemingly minor provision. This provision stipulated that any C-suite personnel changes, any hiring, firing, or reassignment of duties, required a procedural sign-off from the primary payroll vendor's controlling trust. It was presented as a stability clause, a way to ensure the company's leadership wouldn't be suddenly upended, jeopardizing the loan. It was an unprecedented level of vendor oversight, but it was buried in legal jargon, and Grant's team, desperate for the cash, waved it through. The document landed on a desk at Horizon Pay, waiting for the required signature from the authorized representative of the Riverwick Trust. I signed it myself, a clean, simple R.E. in black ink. No one at Helix Ridge ever asked who R.E. was. They had their money. That's all that mattered. With the legal framework in place, I needed the data. I built a private, encrypted dashboard, a system that would serve as my eyes and ears inside Helix Ridge. It was my masterpiece. It wasn't an illegal hack. It was a sophisticated aggregation of legally accessible information. My API with Helix Ridge gave me access to anonymized payroll data. As part of the credit line agreement, I was granted observer-level access to certain financial reporting systems. I wrote scripts that cross-referenced Grant's corporate expense reports, his official company calendar, and the metadata from his corporate email server. The system wasn't looking for keywords. It was looking for anomalies, for deviations from established patterns. It was an automated auditor, a silent, tireless watchdog designed to detect one thing: ethical risk. For months, the dashboard remained a calm sea of green and amber indicators. There were minor flags, a lavish dinner here, an undocumented taxi ride there, but nothing that met the threshold for a grade A violation. I watched, I waited, and I refined the algorithms. I was patient. The system was patient. Then, 3 weeks ago, a klaxon went off. A single data point on the dashboard flashed a stark, unmissable red. The system flagged a transaction, a $12,000 charge on the corporate American Express card. It was a first-class, round-trip ticket to Zurich. That alone wasn't unusual. The anomaly was the passenger's name, Sable Hart. The expense had been coded to the Q4 marketing expansion budget, but the name didn't correspond to any employee, contractor, or registered vendor in the Helix Ridge system. My dashboard automatically cross-referenced the name with Grant's calendar. There she was, multiple entries, labeled simply S.H. Consult, meetings in the evenings, at high-end restaurants, far from the office. A quick, encrypted search through public records filled in the rest. Sable Hart was a 26-year-old brand strategist and former model with a very active social media presence and no discernible experience in logistics. The system flagged the final, damning piece of evidence. The expense was personally approved by Grant, but the justification field was left blank. He had booked a lavish international trip for his mistress on company money and hadn't even bothered to invent a plausible lie. It was arrogant, it was sloppy, and it was a clear, unambiguous violation of the company's fiduciary and ethics policies. It was a grade A ethics violation. I stared at the flashing red light on my monitor. The data was clean, the proof incontrovertible. I didn't feel a pang of jealousy. I felt the cold, satisfying click of a final data point locking into place, the last number in a long and complex equation. My husband's affair was not a personal betrayal. It was a system vulnerability. His infidelity was not a heartbreak. It was a security breach. I didn't get jealous. I opened the log file for the incident, and with the detached precision of a programmer documenting a critical bug, I began to write. The discovery that tipped the balance from a strategic exercise to an immediate tactical assault came not from a financial report, but from a calendar entry. My dashboard, ever vigilant, flagged a newly created, high-priority meeting scheduled for 11 p.m. tonight in one of the hotel's private penthouse suites. The attendee list was small and exclusive: Grant and the 3 board members most loyal to him. The meeting's title was Project Coronation. The agenda, encrypted but not strongly enough to resist the back doors I had built, was a corporate coup in miniature. They planned to hold a snap vote, citing a manufactured imminent market threat to grant the CEO emergency powers. It would dissolve the independent oversight committee and give Grant unilateral authority over acquisitions and executive appointments. He wasn't just cheating on me, He was preparing to seize absolute control of the kingdom. The universe, it seems, has a flair for irony. The second piece of the puzzle arrived by mistake. An email, sent by a flustered junior secretary working for one of Grant's VPs, intended for G. Levitt at helixridge.com. Her frantic fingers typed R. Levitt at our home. Net instead. It was my personal email, a relic from the early days of our marriage, an address Grant insisted I use for domestic matters. The subject was minutes from pre-gala strategy call. Attached was not a document, but a 3 MP audio file. I slipped on a pair of noise-canceling earbuds. The ballroom's sycophantic applause for Grant fading into a dull roar. I pressed play. The audio was a recording of a conference call from the previous week. Grant's voice was unmistakable, laced with the casual arrogance he reserved for his inner circle. "The board is getting nervous about the quarterly numbers," one of the VPs was saying. Grant cut him off with a dismissive chuckle. "The numbers are fine. Miriam is just a pessimist. We'll handle her. The bigger issue is optics." A pause. Then, the words that turned my blood to ice. "We just need to make sure everything is locked down before the vote. No loose ends. Rowan? Don't worry about Rowan. She's decorative wallpaper. She'll be on my arm, smiling for the cameras. She's completely out of the picture, and she doesn't even know it." The file ended. I sat there for a moment, the sound of my own breathing loud in my ears. Decorative wallpaper. He hadn't just pushed me out of the boardroom. He had reduced me to an inanimate object in his life, a thing to be positioned for optimal effect. The insult was so pure, so perfectly distilled, it didn't even sting. It clarified. Just then, my phone buzzed with a notification from a secure messaging app. The sender was Miriam Quaid. There was no text, just a single image attachment. I opened it. It was a high-resolution photograph of a hotel bill from the Lake Spire Grand. The name on the folio was Sable Hart. The dates corresponded to a business development trip Grant had supposedly taken 2 months ago. The charges included 3 nights in the presidential suite, nearly $4,000 in room service champagne, and a significant charge at the hotel's luxury boutique. At the bottom of the page, scrawled in a familiar, confident hand, was Grant's signature, authorizing the entire bill to be charged to his corporate account. Miriam had seen it. She had flagged the same anomaly I had. I typed a quick reply. "The Serpent's Coil, 30 minutes, come alone." The Serpent's Coil was a small, dark bar tucked into a side street a few blocks from the hotel, a place where deals were made in hushed tones over expensive whiskey. The light was tinted a deep, aquatic blue, making everyone look like they were underwater. I was there first, a glass of neat bourbon waiting on the table. Miriam slid into the booth opposite me, her face pale, her usual composure fractured by a network of fine worry lines. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. "He's going to fire me," she said, her voice a raw whisper. "I know it. I've been blocking his attempts to cook the books, to reclassify debt as assets to inflate the Q3 report. He's pushing for a massive, uncollateralized acquisition, and I won't sign off. He's coming for my job." She took a desperate sip of water. "Rowan, I'm sorry about everything, but if this company collapses, I don't get a golden parachute. I get unemployed." I listened, letting her fear fill the space between us. When she was finished, I didn't offer sympathy. I offered a weapon. I slid a thin leather folder across the table. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a copy of the Horizon Pay service contract. The second was the 3-page addendum, the one signed to secure the line of credit. I had highlighted Clause 11B, the payroll safety mode, and the section of the addendum that gave Riverwick Trust oversight on C-suite changes. Miriam read them, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was a woman who understood the brutal poetry of a legal contract. She traced the lines of text with her finger, her breathing growing shallow. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a terrifying, dawning comprehension. "This is an insane level of vendor control," she breathed. "The power this gives, whoever this is, they could paralyze the company." She looked back at the addendum. The signature for the trust. R.E. Her gaze snapped back to my face. Her mind, so adept at connecting financial data points, now connecting the personal ones. Rowan Ellis, she whispered, the name hanging in the air like smoke. You? You're Riverwick? I picked up my bourbon, the amber liquid catching the blue light. I met her gaze over the rim of the glass. I'm not just an investor. Miriam, I said, my voice steady and cold. I'm the one holding the switch. The fear in her eyes was replaced by something else. Awe. And then, a glint of steel. She was no longer a victim. She was a co-conspirator. He's been faking the inventory numbers, she said, her voice dropping lower. For 2 quarters, he's been pressuring one of our main suppliers in the Midwest to sign off on phantom shipments, promising them a bigger contract down the line. He's paying them a consulting fee from an off-balance sheet slush fund. She reached into her purse and slid a tiny USB stick across the table. I have a recording of a call between him and the supplier. It's all there. This was my second piece of evidence. Solid, irrefutable proof of financial fraud. I took the drive. I need to get this to Jonas Reed and Marla Keene, I said, naming the 2 independent board members, the only ones Grant hadn't managed to buy or bully. Securely. I have their private email addresses, Miriam said. They trust me. The final piece fell into my lap when I returned to the hotel ballroom. Just as the dessert course was being served, Miriam sent another secure message. It was a series of screenshots from a private group chat. The chat's name, in a display of breathtaking arrogance, was Cement the Throne. The participants were Grant and his 3 loyal VPs. I scrolled through the images. They were discussing the after-party vote. They were outlining their plan to sideline Reed and Keene, and they were detailing the strategy for firing Miriam, complete with a fabricated paper trail of poor performance reviews. The final message was from Grant, sent just an hour ago. After tonight, she's history. The company will finally be able to move at the speed of my vision. I returned to my seat at the head table. Grant was laughing at some joke. The picture of a conquering hero. He didn't notice the phone in my hand. In the quiet solitude of my encrypted server, I created a new master folder. I uploaded the audio file of Grant dismissing me as wallpaper. I uploaded the photograph of the hotel bill. I uploaded the recording of him orchestrating inventory fraud. I uploaded the screenshots from the Cement the Throne chat. I compiled it all into a single, password-protected dossier, a digital war chest, filled with the ammunition I needed to burn his empire to the ground. I named the file Nobody. The calculated warmth of the ballroom felt suffocating after the cold. Clean air of the bar. I slid back into my chair at the head table, just as the waiters were clearing the main course plates. Grant was deep in conversation with the COO, his back partially to me, a posture I had long ago learned was intentional. He was walling me off, even physically. As a young server, a woman with tired eyes and an impeccably neat bun reached for my plate. She leaned in slightly, her voice barely a whisper against the clatter of silver. "Ma'am," she murmured, her eyes flicking towards the men at the table before meeting mine. "We heard what they called you, the woman at the table, a nobody." Her grip tightened for a second on the porcelain. "Some of us know who keeps things running. We see you." She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, and was gone, vanishing back into the seamless choreography of the service staff. It was a fleeting moment, a tiny spark in the vast, cold room, but it warmed me more than the expensive wine ever could. She was one of the invisibles, and she saw me. My plan was not a solitary one. It was an orchestra of quiet collaborators, people who, like the server, were routinely overlooked but possessed their own forms of power. My first stop was the periphery of the room, near the towering floral arrangements, where David, the hotel's head of events, was overseeing his team. He saw me approaching and moved to intercept me, his face a perfect mask of professional calm. "Mrs. Levitt," he said smoothly, "is everything to your satisfaction?" "Perfectly. David, thank you." I kept my voice light. I just wanted to confirm the special presentation arrangements. He didn't miss a beat. His hand moved discreetly to his pocket, and he palmed me a thin plastic card, the same color as the hotel's branding. It looked like a room key. It wasn't. "Everything is in place as you requested," he said, his eyes conveying a meaning his words did not. "Mic A is patched directly to the secondary LED feed. It's isolated from the house system until you activate it. The signal is clean." He was a former military communications specialist, a detail I'd learned from his file. He understood the importance of a secure channel. I slipped the card into my evening bag. "Thank you, David. Your professionalism is greatly appreciated." I knew from his background check that his sister had been a victim of a corporate downsizing at a company Grant had acquired 5 years ago. He was an ally who required no explanation. Back at my seat, under the cover of the table, I unlocked my phone, navigating to my secure communication platform. The pieces were falling into place across a silent, digital battlefield. A new message from Miriam was waiting. "Affidavit signed, notarized via mobile service, and ready for deployment. I am prepared to present it to the board upon your signal." Miriam, pushed to the brink, was no longer just a source of information. She was a willing combatant. She had transformed her fear into a weapon. My next message was to a secure group containing only 2 recipients, Jonas Reed and Marla Keene, the board's independent conscience. They were old school, principled executives from a generation that valued integrity over disruption. My message was simple. "The file is now in your possession via Miriam Quade's channel. I trust you will find it illuminating. I strongly advise you to delay any unscheduled votes until the conclusion of tonight's official program." Marla's reply came back in less than a minute. "File received. We will not be bullied into any rash decisions. Mrs. Levitt, we will wait for the full data set." Jonas's followed moments later. "Consider the brakes applied. We want to hear what you have to say." They were my firewall on the board, and they would hold. The final digital confirmation was with my lawyer, Asha Moreland. She was waiting in a suite on the hotel's 14th floor, a brilliant, shark-like contract lawyer I'd retained months ago. My message? "Stage is set. Stand by for signal." Her reply? "Ready to make it rain. Rowan." Asha loved a good fight. Now for the physical stagecraft. I excused myself from the table on the pretense of finding the powder room. Instead, I walked toward the main stage, where the MC was reviewing his notes on a small lectern. The stage manager, a harried-looking young man with a headset, intercepted me. "Ma'am, can I help you?" I gave him my most charming, non-threatening smile. "Oh, I'm so sorry to bother you. The program is just wonderful. I work with one of the event's quiet sponsors, and there's been a tiny last-minute addition to the script. Grant, my husband, is so forgetful." I handed him a freshly printed index card from my purse. The card's font and layout perfectly matched the others on the lectern. It read, "And now, a special 90-second presentation from a key partner whose support makes nights like this possible." The stage manager glanced at it, then at the official schedule. "This wasn't on my copy." "I know. It's terribly last minute," I said, my voice full of practiced apology. "Grant just confirmed it. He wanted it to be a surprise for the board." The mention of Grant's name worked like a magic word. The man's resistance evaporated. He simply nodded and slid the card into the MC's sequence. My next stop was the lighting and sound booth at the back of the ballroom. A young technician was monitoring a dizzying array of screens. "You're doing an incredible job," I said, startling him slightly. "The ambiance is just breathtaking." He blushed. "Thank you, ma'am. There's one small lighting cue my husband wanted for the surprise sponsor video," I continued smoothly. "When you get the signal from the stage manager, it will just be a tap on the mic. Could you switch the main LED background to the payroll confirmed graphic? It's just a little inside joke for the team." He nodded, typing a note into his system. "On cue. Switch BG to payroll conf PA." He had no idea what it meant. He was just following orders. On my way back, I paused to speak with the head of hotel security, a broad-shouldered man whose posture radiated calm authority. "I need to report a potential issue," I said, my voice low and concerned. "My husband, Mr. Levitt, is under a great deal of stress. There's a chance he may become agitated during the latter part of the program if there is any kind of verbal altercation on stage. I need your men to understand one thing. They are not to touch me or remove me from the stage unless they receive a direct order from either Mr. Jonas Reed or Ms. Marla Keene." I handed him their business cards. "They will be in charge of de-escalation." By framing it as a concern for Grant's stability, I had ensured my own protection. The security chief nodded, his expression serious. "Understood, Mrs. Levitt. We'll be on standby." My final arrangement was with the band leader, a seasoned jazz musician taking a break near the stage. "A small request for the sponsor presentation," I said. "Right after the speaker is introduced, I need a dramatic pause, 10 full seconds of absolute silence from the band before the video rolls. Can you do that for me?" He looked at me, a flicker of understanding in his old eyes. He'd seen 1,000 nights of corporate drama. 10 seconds of silence," he confirmed with a grin. "The loudest sound there is. You got it, lady." He called it a hole for the truth to fall into. I returned to my chair. All the pieces were in place: the digital traps, the legal ambushes, the human allies hiding in plain sight. The MC was approaching the podium to introduce Grant for his main speech. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with unspoken tensions and the cloying sweetness of dessert wine. I took a slow, deep breath, my lungs filling with the charged atmosphere. I could taste it on my tongue, a faint, sharp trace of metal, like the air before a lightning strike. The storm was no longer coming. It was here. The wave of applause was a physical force, washing over Grant as he took his place at the podium. He stood for a moment, letting it crest, bathing in it. He was a master of the stage, and this was his finest performance. The spotlight carved him out of the darkness, turning his silvering temples into a halo and his expensive suit into armor. "Thank you," he began, his voice a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the ballroom's state-of-the-art sound system. "Thank you. It is truly humbling to stand here tonight, not as your CEO, but as a member of the great Helix Ridge family." The word family hung in the air, a carefully chosen piece of emotional manipulation. He spoke of loyalty, of shared sacrifice, of the bonds that held them all together through lean times and prosperous ones. His words were a warm blanket woven from the finest thread of deceit. He was selling them a mythology, and they were buying it at a premium. I watched him, a student of his craft, marveling at the sheer audacity of it all. He could sell ice in a blizzard. He was nearing the end of his remarks, the part of the speech where he would pivot from corporate leader to humble husband, adding the final, personal touch that would seal the performance. His eyes found me at the head table. A warm, intimate smile spread across his face, a smile designed for the television cameras and the industry photographers. "And of course," he said, his voice softening, becoming thick with feigned emotion, "none of this would be possible without the unwavering support of the most important person in my life." He paused, stepping away from the podium and walking to the edge of the stage, closer to our table. He extended a hand towards me. "My wife, Rowan." A fresh wave of syrupy, sentimental applause rippled through the room. He wasn't finished. For the grand finale, he put his hand on my shoulder, a gesture of possession disguised as affection, a public claiming of his most valuable decorative asset. "She is my rock, my confidant," he declared to the captivated audience, his voice ringing with false sincerity. "She is the light that guides me home." The room melted. I could feel it. A collective, heartfelt sigh. Women dabbed at their eyes. Men nodded in solemn approval. He had done it. He had presented the perfect picture of success. The powerful man made human by the love of a good, silent woman. In that moment, under the weight of his hand and the gaze of 100 duped executives. I raised my wine glass. It was a simple gesture, a wife toasting her husband, but as I lifted it, the spotlight caught the crystal, and for a fleeting second, it flashed, reflecting a single, razor-thin line of light across my face, a blade of light, a silent promise. Grant concluded to a standing ovation. He returned to his seat, flushed with victory, and squeezed my hand under the table. "Went well, don't you think?" he whispered, his ego glowing. "Beautifully," I whispered back. The MC returned to the podium, his face beaming. "Thank you, Grant, for those inspiring words. A true leader and a true family man." He shuffled his index cards. "And now, it looks like we have one final item on the program before we conclude for the evening." He read from the card I had given the stage manager. "And now, a special 90-second presentation from a key partner whose support makes nights like this possible." He paused, tapping the microphone lightly with his finger. It was the cue. In the control booth, the young technician followed his instructions. On the massive LED screen behind the stage, the looping video of the Helix Ridge corporate logo, a stylized, soaring eagle, vanished. It was replaced by a live feed from a discreet camera positioned at the back of the room, showing the stage and the podium from a wide angle. The switch was instantaneous and jarring. The audience, expecting a slickly produced sponsor video, murmured in confusion. The MC faltered, looking from his card to the screen and back again. Ladies and gentlemen, please bear with us. We seem to be experiencing a slight technical—" He never finished the sentence. I stood up. I placed my napkin on the table, took the access card from my purse, and walked the 10 feet to the stage. The room fell silent. The only sound the soft rustle of my dress. I bypassed the stunned MC, walked directly to the podium, and took hold of the microphone. The live feed on the screen behind me now showed a close-up of my face. I had activated Mic A, my secure channel. "My apologies," I said, my voice calm and clear, amplified to fill every corner of the vast room. "There's no video, but we do have one final, unscheduled thank you to make tonight." I looked out across the sea of faces, a collection of the most powerful people in our industry. "It's a thank you from the person who actually signs your paychecks." A low, confused rumble went through the crowd. Forks and spoons clattered against plates. Conversations stopped mid-word. I could feel Grant's eyes boring into me, a look of pure, unadulterated shock. I didn't look at him. I looked at the audience. I pulled a small, folded piece of paper from my evening bag. "I just have 3 brief points of information for the board and the shareholders of Helix Ridge Logistics," I said, my tone as level and devoid of emotion as a machine reading a diagnostic report. I unfolded the paper. First, Horizon Pay Services Contract Number 77B4. This contract governs all payroll and compensation disbursements for this company. The room was utterly still now. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Second, Clause 11B of that contract, the Grade A Ethics Violation Clause, which is triggered by, among other things, the gross misappropriation of corporate funds for personal use. I looked up from the paper and let my eyes sweep across the head table. I saw Beatrice's mouth hanging slightly open. I saw the VPs exchanging panicked glances. "And third," I continued, my voice dropping slightly, drawing them in, "the Riverwick Trust Addendum, which grants the authorized signatory of the trust ultimate oversight in the event of such a violation." I let the words hang in the silent room. I could see the gears turning in their heads, the confusion slowly giving way to a dawning, horrified understanding. I glanced at Grant. His face was a perfect mask of disbelief. The charming, triumphant smile he had worn just moments ago was frozen in place, but it was a grotesque parody now, a rictus of terror. The color was draining from his face, leaving behind a waxy, pale sheen. His eyes, which had been so full of confident fire, were now wide, blank pools of shock. The architecture of his public persona was crumbling in real time. At that exact moment, as if on cue, A figure rose from the head table. It was Miriam Quaid, with the quiet dignity of a woman who had nothing left to lose. She walked to the stage. She moved with a purpose I had never seen in her before. She didn't look at Grant. She didn't look at the audience. She walked directly to the podium, and in the cavernous silence, she placed a thin, neatly bound stack of documents on the lectern beside my hand. The cover page was clearly visible on the giant screen behind us. Internal audit, Q2, Q3, financial discrepancies, and unauthorized executive expenditures. The truth was now on the table. Miriam stepped back, her duty done. I looked out at the room. No one was eating, no one was drinking, no one was speaking. The standing ovation of a few minutes ago was a distant, forgotten echo. There was no applause now. There were no gasps. There was only a thick, heavy, absolute silence. The silence of a world tilting on its axis. The silence of a king who had just been publicly, brutally, and irrevocably dethroned. In the suffocating silence, every eye in the grand ballroom was locked on me. They were no longer looking at a CEO's wife. They were looking at an anomaly, a disruption to the natural order of their world. Grant, standing paralyzed between the stage and our table, finally found his voice. It wasn't the commanding baritone of his speech, but a ragged, desperate whisper that barely carried the few feet between us. "Rowan," he hissed, his face a mask of pleading and fury. "Rowan, what are you doing? Stop this. Not here. Not in front of everyone." His appeal to decorum, to the sanctity of their public image, was so predictable it was almost comforting. He wasn't afraid of the truth. He was afraid of the audience. I turned from the podium, my movements slow and deliberate, and took my phone from my evening bag. I held it up so he, and the front tables, could see the screen. The custom application I had built was open, its interface brutally simple. There were no graphics, no logos, just black text on a white background, a single question, and 2 buttons. Confirm integrity hold, execute, cancel. I spoke, but my words were not for him. They were for the board, for the shareholders, for every employee whose livelihood he had gambled with. My voice remained level, amplified by the microphone, a cool counterpoint to his panicked whisper. Per Clause 11B of the Horizon Pay Agreement, I stated, as if reading from a technical manual. When a Grade A ethics violation by the CEO is detected and verified, all payroll and bonus compensation is automatically diverted to a secure escrow account. I paused, letting the clinical words sink in. The funds are held until an independent investigation is concluded by the board. It's a safety feature. A tremor of panic went through the board of directors' table. Beatrice's husband, a senior VP named Alistair, shot to his feet, his face florid with a mixture of rage and confusion. "What is the meaning of this?" he boomed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Who in God's name do you think you are to make such a threat?" I met his outraged gaze without blinking. The microphone picked up my reply, delivering it to every corner of the room with chilling clarity. I'm the person with the authority to press the button. And then I did. My thumb, steady and certain, pressed the glowing green "Execute" on the screen. There was no sound from the phone itself, but I felt a faint vibration, a haptic confirmation that the command had been sent and received. The screen instantly refreshed. The question was gone, replaced by a single, stark confirmation in bold, red letters. Integrity. Hold. Active status. On hold. For a single, silent second, nothing happened. The word just hung there, on my phone and in the air. Then the sound began. It wasn't one sound, but dozens, then 100. The synchronized chime and buzz of smartphones receiving notifications. It started at the head table and spread through the room like a virus, a low, electronic hum of mass communication. Heads dropped, eyes widened. Alistair, still standing, fumbled for his phone. I watched his face drain of all color as he read the screen. He looked like he had been physically struck. Across the room, Other executives were doing the same, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock to raw, primal fear. I knew what their screens said. My system was designed for immediate, undeniable feedback. They were receiving automated alerts from their financial institutions. Alert: scheduled wire transfer of $250,000 for quarterly retention bonus has failed. Notification: inbound transfer from Helix Ridge Logistics has been returned by originating bank. Frozen: your executive compensation account is under an administrative hold pending review. Contact your payroll administrator for more information. The safety feature was working perfectly. The money had stopped, all of it. The low hum of notifications was replaced by a rising tide of frantic, panicked whispers. The illusion of the grand, unified Helix Ridge family had shattered in an instant. This was no longer a gala. It was the scene of a financial catastrophe. Through the chaos, two voices rose with authority. Jonas Reed and Marla Keene stood up, their faces grim. "Emergency board meeting," Jonas announced, his voice cutting through the noise. "Now, Penthouse Suite B, all board members." Marla's eyes found mine. "You will join us, Mrs. Levitt, and you will bring your counsel." Grant was still frozen in place, a statue of a broken man. The security team, following my earlier instructions, made no move towards me. They simply formed a discreet perimeter, watching, waiting. As the board members began to rise, a woman walked calmly and confidently toward the stage. It was Asha Moreland, my lawyer. She had been waiting in the lobby, and my text message, a single word, "execute," had summoned her. She was dressed in a severe but elegant black suit, carrying a leather portfolio. She joined me at the podium, a picture of absolute calm in the eye of the storm. "Before the board convenes," Asha said, her voice the precise, cutting instrument of a seasoned litigator, "there is one final piece of documentation for the public record." She took the Riverwick Trust addendum from her portfolio. As she did, the live feed on the giant LED screen behind us changed. The wide shot of the chaotic room was replaced by a high-resolution, full-screen document view, a feed I had arranged for David to patch through from Asha's laptop. "This is the addendum to the Horizon Pay contract," Asha explained, her voice steady. "It was signed by Mr. Levitt's own legal team. It grants final authorization on certain financial and personnel matters to the designated signatory of the Riverwick Trust in the event of a contractual breach." She used a laser pointer to highlight a section on the screen. The text was dense legalese, but the final line was starkly simple. "All contingency actions, including the activation of the payroll safety mode, require the explicit final authorization of the registered Riverwick Trust signatory." Alistair, his face now a mottled purple, shouted from the floor. "And who is that? Who is this Riverwick Trust? This is an outrage." Asha didn't answer him. "Please display the signature page," she said calmly. The image on the screen changed. It was the final page of the addendum. The signatures of Grant's legal team were on the left. On the right, under the heading, "For the Riverwick Trust," was a single, elegant signature in black ink. The screen zoomed in, making the letters 10 feet high. First, just the initials were visible, R.E. A murmur of confusion went through the remaining audience. Then, the image panned out, revealing the full printed name beneath the signature line, a name every person in that room knew, but had never associated with power, or money, or control. Authorized signatory, Rowan Ellis. The story clicked into place, not for everyone, but for enough of them. The quiet wife, the anonymous trust, the payroll company, the nobody, the woman with the button, it all coalesced into a single, terrifying, undeniable truth. A wave of audible gasps swept the room. Half the people there were staring in dawning, horrified comprehension. They understood the coup they had just witnessed. The other half just stared, mouths agape, swallowing dryly against the sudden, certain knowledge that the world was no longer what they thought it was. The decorative wallpaper had just revealed itself to be the load-bearing wall, and it had just scheduled the entire building for demolition. The penthouse suite of the Kingswell Hotel was a world away from the chaos of the ballroom below. Here, the air was cold, sterile, and silent, scrubbed clean of emotion. The room was a monument to corporate anonymity, a long mahogany table polished to a mirror shine, uncomfortable leather chairs, and bland, abstract art on the walls. We took our places. I sat at one end of the table, with Asha and Miriam on either side of me. Grant was forced to sit at the other, flanked by the 3 loyalist board members who now looked at him with the nervous, shifty eyes of cornered animals. Jonas Reed and Marla Keene took the seats in the middle, positioning themselves as arbiters. Behind Grant's head, a large oil painting of a sailboat battling a storm-tossed sea was hanging conspicuously askew. Someone must have bumped it, or perhaps the hotel staff had simply been careless. But in the crushing silence of that room, it felt like a prophecy, a world knocked off its axis. There were no pleasantries. Jonas Reed began, his voice flat and hard as granite. "Ms. Moreland, you have the floor." Asha rose, her movements economical and precise. She didn't address Grant. She didn't address his allies. She spoke only to Jonas and Marla, as if they were the only people in the room who mattered. She placed her portfolio on the table and opened it. "The evidence is clear and organized into 2 primary categories," she began, her voice the calm, dispassionate instrument of a surgeon about to make an incision. "First, the misappropriation of corporate funds." She placed a document on the table, a copy of Sable Hart's hotel bill from the Lakespire Grand, and slid it down the polished surface. Exhibit A, an expenditure of over $17,000 for a non-employee, Ms. Sable Hart, classified as a marketing expense and personally approved by the CEO. This includes travel, lodging, and personal shopping expenses. We have flight records and hotel security logs to corroborate. She then turned to a second file. Second, and more significantly, we have evidence of a conspiracy among executive officers to breach their fiduciary duty to the company and its shareholders. Asha looked directly at the 3 VPs sitting beside Grant. They flinched as if struck. "I am referring," she continued, "to a series of communications under the project name Cement the Throne." She didn't need to show them the screenshots. She knew they knew. These communications detail a plan to hold an unauthorized vote to dissolve the Independent Oversight Committee, a plan to terminate the chief financial officer for performing her duties, and a plan to willfully mislead the board regarding the company's Q3 performance. This constitutes a direct violation of SEC regulations and the company's own bylaws. Grant finally broke. He slammed his hand on the table, the sound cracking through the room like a gunshot. The sailboat painting trembled on the wall behind him. "This is a circus," he snarled, his face a blotchy red. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "This has nothing to do with the company. This is a domestic dispute. She's my wife. She's doing this because she's vindictive, because she's unhappy in our marriage." He was pleading, his defense a pathetic attempt to drag this back into a world he understood, a world of personal drama, a world where he was the powerful husband and I was the emotional, irrational wife. Jonas Reed did not even look at him. His eyes, cold and gray, were fixed on the documents in front of him. "Mr. Levitt," Jonas said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl that cut Grant off mid-rant. "We are not in your home. We are in a boardroom. We are discussing the misappropriation of shareholder funds and a conspiracy to defraud this board. Your marital problems are your own. Here, you are the CEO, and you are accountable." The rebuke was so swift, so brutal, that it left Grant speechless, his mouth hanging open. The hammer had fallen. Marla Keene turned her attention to Miriam. "Ms. Quaid, the allegations in your audit report are severe. Can you confirm the numbers?" Miriam's voice was quiet, but it carried the undeniable weight of fact. "I can," she said. "For the past 2 quarters, reported inventory assets have been inflated by an average of 14%. This was achieved through a series of fraudulent purchase orders issued to a key supplier, Midwest Freight Partners. The supplier was compensated for their complicity through an off-balance sheet slush fund controlled by the CEO's office. She slid the USB stick across the table. That drive contains a recorded conversation between Mr. Levitt and the supplier's owner, arranging the terms. The room fell silent again. Grant's allies stared at the mahogany table, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. They were rats on a sinking ship, and the water was rising fast. Finally, Jonas looked at me. "Mrs. Ellis," he said, using my maiden name, a deliberate and powerful choice. "Your system has frozen this company's finances, the rank-and-file employees, the truck drivers, the warehouse workers. They will not be paid. What is your proposed solution?" This was the moment, the checkmate. "The Riverwick addendum is clear," I said, my voice steady. "The payroll safety mode is a protective measure, not a punitive one. It is designed to safeguard the company's assets from a compromised executive." I looked down the long table at my husband. He was no longer a king. He was just a man in an expensive suit, cornered and broken. "The only way to release the funds," I stated, "is to remove the source of the compromise. The addendum provides a single, clear path forward: the immediate and temporary suspension of the CEO and the activation of the Special Oversight Protocol, placing the company under the joint operational control of the CFO and the independent board members until a full, formal investigation can be completed." It was not a request. It was a statement of terms. Marla Keene didn't hesitate. She had seen enough. Her career had been built on decisive action, and she recognized a moment of corporate life or death when she saw one. "I vote for the immediate suspension of Grant Levitt as CEO and the activation of the Special Oversight Protocol as stipulated," she said, her voice ringing in the silent room, "effective immediately." Her vote was a gavel strike. It broke the spell of fear that Grant had held over the others. Alistair, the VP, who had shouted at me from the ballroom floor, saw his multi-million-dollar bonus evaporating. His loyalty, it turned out, had a very specific price. He looked at Grant, then at the documents on the table, then at Marla. His survival instinct kicked in. I second the motion," he stammered, his voice thin, the final nail in Grant's coffin. One by one, the votes came in. The other two VPs, seeing the direction of the wind, quickly and pathetically abandoned their king. It was a rout. Jonas made it official. "The motion carries. Grant Levitt, you are suspended as CEO of Helix Ridge Logistics, pending a full investigation, effective immediately. An interim executive committee will be formed, led by our CFO, Miriam Quaid." He then turned to me, a look of grudging respect in his eyes. "Mrs. Ellis, given your unique position and clear grasp of the company's vulnerabilities, the board would like to offer you the position of interim CEO." I shook my head before he had even finished the sentence. "I must decline," I said simply. "That would be a conflict of interest." I looked at the board members, at the new power structure solidifying in the room. My role was never to run this company. It was to protect it from being run into the ground. I held up my phone. "I'm just the one who holds the switch, and I'll continue to hold it until I'm satisfied that the system is secure." My role was finished. I stood to leave. As Asha and I walked to the door, we passed Grant. He was staring at the crooked painting on the wall, his face utterly blank, a man whose world had been so completely dismantled that he could no longer process it. When we opened the door to the hallway, we found one person standing there, waiting. Vivian Levitt. She must have been listening. Her ear pressed to the wood. Her face, usually a mask of regal composure, was a ruin. Her eyes were wide with a horror that went beyond the loss of money. It was the horror of a matriarch who had just lost her entire dynasty. She had lost her son. She had lost her throne. And worst of all, she had lost the story she told herself about her family's greatness. The silence that met her was more damning than any accusation. When we re-entered the ballroom, It was like walking into a photograph of a disaster. The party was over. The soul had left the room, leaving only a husk behind. 100 hushed, frantic conversations were taking place at once, creating a low, anxious hum. Guests stood in tense little clusters, their faces illuminated by the glow of their smartphones. Waiters hovered uncertainly by the walls, their trays of untouched petit fours and half-empty champagne flutes forgotten. The air, once thick with perfume and self-congratulation, now smelled of cooling food and collective fear. Dominating the scene, glowing with an unimpeachable, cold authority, was the massive LED screen behind the stage. The Helix Ridge logo was gone. In its place, in a clean sans serif font, was a single, stark message. Payroll system restored. Pending governance, vote confirmation. The words hung in the air like a verdict. The MC stood uselessly by the podium, shuffling his cards, his professional smile gone, replaced by the slack-jawed look of a man who had completely lost control of his own show. Everyone was checking their banking apps, their faces a mixture of hope and dread. They were no longer executives and shareholders. They were just people waiting to see if they were going to get paid. I walked back to the stage. Asha followed a few paces behind, a silent, formidable guardian. The crowd parted for me, a ripple of whispers and stares following in my wake. I took the microphone from its stand. The feedback of its activation was a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the murmuring. All eyes snapped to me. For the sake of clarity, I began, my voice even and devoid of triumph. Let me explain what that message means. I gestured to the screen behind me. The board has voted. The special oversight protocol is now active. As a result, the system's integrity hold is ready to be disengaged. A wave of palpable relief washed through the room. A few people let out audible sighs. To be precise, I continued, crushing their nascent hope, it will be disengaged for the company's employees, the warehouse staff, the drivers, the administrative assistants, the logistics coordinators. Every single person who does the actual work of this company will receive their full salary tonight, as scheduled. I let that sink in before delivering the final blow. However, I said, my voice hardening slightly, the executive compensation and bonus packages for all individuals named in the CFO's internal audit, the packages based on inflated numbers and fraudulent reporting, will remain frozen, pending the outcome of a full independent forensic accounting investigation. The line was drawn. The guillotine had fallen. The room was divided into two distinct classes, the workers and the accused. At that moment, the hotel's head of security approached the stage, two of his men flanking him. They didn't look at me. They walked directly to Grant, who was still standing by the head table, looking like a man who had woken up in a foreign country where he didn't speak the language. "Mr. Levitt," the security chief said, his voice polite but firm, "we need to ask you to leave the premises." It was the ultimate humiliation. Grant looked around the room, his eyes desperately scanning the faces of his colleagues, his friends, the men he had promoted and made rich. He was searching for a single look of support, a gesture of solidarity, a friend who would stand up and object. He found nothing. The faces he saw were either cold and furious, belonging to those whose bonuses were now frozen, or they were pointedly turned away, refusing to meet his gaze, severing their connection to him with a cowardice that was absolute. His empire of loyalty had been built on a foundation of greed, and now that the money had stopped, the empire had evaporated. He was no longer their king. He was a liability. He was a contagion. As security gently but inexorably guided him toward the exit, my eyes scanned the room and found her. Sable Hart. She was standing half-hidden behind a marble pillar, a ghost in a glittering gown. Her perfectly applied lipstick was slightly smeared, and her hand was pressed to her mouth. Her phone was vibrating in her other hand, a relentless, buzzing beacon of her own exploding life. Her transaction was complete. The services she had rendered in exchange for a first-class ticket to Zurich had just been publicly, ruinously exposed. She was no longer a beautiful consultant. She was just Exhibit A. A new voice took the stage. It was Miriam. She hadn't asked for the microphone. She had simply taken it. She stood at the podium, and for the first time all night, she looked not like a cautious accountant, but like a leader. "Tonight was supposed to celebrate a vision," she said, her voice clear and strong, resonating with an authority no one in that room had ever heard from her before. But that vision was a mirage. It was built on false numbers and broken trust. She looked out at the anxious faces of the junior and mid-level managers in the crowd. The real value of Helix Ridge isn't in a stock price inflated by lies. It's in our drivers who cross the country in the dead of night. It's in our warehouse teams who can pack a truck in half the time of our competitors. It's in our people. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. From tonight forward, Helix Ridge Logistics belongs to the people who do the work. While she spoke, I acted, on my phone. I navigated to the control panel of the payroll system. I selected the employee payroll group, a list of thousands of names, none of whom sat in this room. I bypassed the integrity hold, entering my authorization code. Then I selected the executive compensation group, the 50 or so names on Miriam's audit list, and locked the hold firmly in place. I typed a final command. Release. Employee payroll group. Maintain hold. Executive compensation group. Execute. The moment I pressed the button, a new wave of electronic chimes filled the air. But this time, they were different. They weren't alerts of failed transfers. They were the happy, mundane pings of direct deposits clearing. A young marketing manager near the front gasped, staring at her phone. "I got paid," she whispered, her voice full of disbelief. A man beside her nodded, a huge grin spreading across his face. "Me too." The relief was explosive. The tension that had gripped the room for the past hour shattered, and in its place, applause erupted. It wasn't the polite, manufactured applause from Grant's speech. This was a raw, ragged, and deeply felt sound. It was the sound of rent being paid, of groceries being bought, of a fundamental promise being kept. They weren't clapping for me. They weren't clapping for Miriam. They were clapping for the simple, profound beauty of a paycheck that had been earned and honored. As the applause began to subside, a figure moved through the thinning crowd towards me. It was Vivian. Her face was a marble mask of fury, her eyes burning with a cold, aristocratic rage. She stopped a few feet from me, her presence a pocket of icy silence in the relieved warmth of the room. "You," she hissed, her voice trembling with a lifetime of shattered pride. "After everything we gave you, the name, the position, you have ruined everything." I looked at my mother-in-law, at the architect of the silent, supportive role I was meant to play. I felt no anger, no satisfaction, only a quiet, final sense of clarity. "No, Vivian," I said, my voice calm. "I fixed it." She had no reply. She simply stood there, a queen without a kingdom, as the truth of my words dismantled the last vestiges of her world. I turned and walked away, leaving her behind with the empty glasses and the overflowing truth. As I stepped out of the hotel's grand entrance, a cool breeze met my face. The air smelled clean, washed. A light rain had begun to fall over Halverton, a gentle, steady drizzle that pattered softly on the pavement. The sharp, electric scent of ozone was finally gone, replaced by the simple, honest smell of wet earth. The backstage room was small, windowless, and smelled of dust and old cables. It was a purely functional space, the unglamorous heart of the grand ballroom's illusion. A single, bare table stood in the center under a harsh fluorescent light. On the table lay a single document, its stark black print looking like a final judgment. Beside it was a heavy, expensive-looking fountain pen. They brought Grant in. He wasn't escorted by security anymore. Jonas and Marla walked on either side of him, a grim, silent honor guard. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at anyone. His eyes were fixed on the scuffed toes of his $5,000 shoes. The swagger was gone, the charisma stripped away, leaving behind a hollowed-out man. stooped and aged by the events of the last hour. Asha pointed to the document. It's the formal agreement of your suspension and your consent to a full, unrestricted investigation. Mr. Levitt, standard procedure. Grant looked at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. He picked up the pen, his hand trembling so violently that the nib rattled against the cap as he removed it. He bent over the table, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He tried to sign his name, the name that had once been a symbol of power and vision. The pen shook, and the first letter of his signature was a jagged, broken thing. He pressed down too hard, and a single, fat drop of black ink bled from the nib onto the paper, spreading like a dark stain, the shadow of a fallen king. He finished the signature, a spidery, barely legible scrawl, and pushed the paper away from him as if it were on fire. Jonas slid the document across the table to me. There was a second line waiting. For the Riverwick Trust, confirming the activation of the Special Oversight Protocol. I took the pen from Grant's nerveless fingers. It was still warm. My hand was perfectly steady. I signed my name, Rowan Ellis. The letters clean, controlled and precise, an act of closure, an act of correction. I placed the pen neatly beside the document and then took the plastic audio access card from my pocket, setting it on the table. Its purpose was served. The mission was complete. As if on cue, my phone, which lay face up on the corner of the table, lit up with a single, quiet notification, a text message from my system's automated alert. Status update. Payroll for all Helix Ridge Logistics non-executive staff released. Total disbursement, $14,732,809.24. Transaction complete. It was done. The circuit was closed. The system was balanced. I walked over to a large, dusty mirror leaning against the far wall. A relic from some past event. I looked at my reflection under the harsh, unforgiving light. A strand of hair had come loose from my chignon, falling across my forehead. My face was pale, my eyes large and dark. I saw the woman they had all underestimated, the woman who had been dismissed as a decorative object. I reached up and tucked the stray strand of hair back into place. It was a small, simple gesture of putting things back in order. I didn't need a crown, I had a name, and tonight I had taken it back. Jonas came to stand beside me, his reflection appearing next to mine in the mirror. He was silent for a long moment, watching me. Helix Ridge owes you a debt of gratitude. Mrs. Ellis, he said quietly, his voice low and gravelly. You saved the company from itself. I met his gaze in the mirror, my expression unreadable. I thought of the server with the tired eyes, of the thousands of names on the payroll I had just released, of the families who would not have to worry about their rent this month. They got paid, I replied, my voice soft but firm. That's enough. I turned away from the mirror and walked to the door that led back into the ballroom. Asha held it open for me. The scene inside was a wasteland. The guests were gone. The tables were a chaotic mess of crumpled napkins and abandoned glasses. The only sound was the low hum of the service lights and the distant clatter of the kitchen staff beginning the long process of cleaning up. The great crystal chandeliers, which had earlier seemed so brilliant and full of life, now cast a cold, sterile light over the empty room. As I stood on the threshold, the light from 100 different facets refracted and reflected on the polished marble floor. For a fleeting, surreal moment, the scattered points of light seemed to coalesce, writing a single, shimmering, invisible word across the vast emptiness. Somebody! I stepped across the threshold, my heels clicking softly in the quiet hall. I walked through the wreckage of my husband's party, leaving the backstage room, the signed papers, and the broken man behind me. I didn't look back. The hotel doorman opened the heavy glass doors for me, and I stepped out into the night. The rain was still falling, a gentle, cleansing curtain of water that washed the grime from the city streets. I turned my face up to the cool, clean drops, letting them fall on my skin. I took a deep breath, leaving the scent of stale champagne and deceit behind, and inhaling only the quiet, promising smell of the rain. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It means the world to me. I'm so curious to know where you're all tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know where you're listening. Let's connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And if you really want to support the story and help it reach more people, please hit that hype button. It helps more than you know.